They have young teenage patients showing up at the hospital with vaginal atrophy, uterine atrophy, bleeding, pain.
Canadian journalist Mia Hughes is the author of a 70-page report that scrutinizes the WPATH files, a series of leaked internal files from the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH.
We've never done this to teenage girls before. Healthcare is supposed to improve health, not destroy it.
In this episode, she breaks down what was revealed in these leaked files.
They know what they're doing.
I know I'm talking to a blank wall.
They know that there is significant regret. They know that these children don't understand. And yet, still they do it.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Mia Hughes, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders here at Dissident Dialogues.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
So Mia, you've been kind of doing the circuit, talking about the WPATH files, which you published with Environmental Progress. I want to ask you, you spent a lot of time putting them together, making sure what you published was correct. And then you've spent a couple of months talking about it. What's crystallized in your mind at this point? What are the most important things?
So the most important things, certainly, I'd say there's maybe 4 points with the contents of the files. First and foremost, these are doctors who know they are harming children. And I can say that because I've been talking about this for so long. Every time I talk about this one particular part of the report, it makes me rather angry because it is so obvious that they know they're harming children. And that is, we had a panel discussion that was leaked. And they're all talking about children and adolescents. And so there's a pediatric endocrinologist, and he and his colleagues are talking about the difficulty of speaking to children about puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and the potential loss of fertility that comes with this treatment pathway.
I was just going to say, it's always a good theory that you talk about fertility preservation with a 14-year-old, but I know I'm talking to a blank wall.
So he says, first of all, it's difficult because we're explaining it to children who haven't had high school biology yet. So right off the bat, you know that they know these children don't understand. And then he says, when I'm talking to a 14-year-old about fertility preservation, I know it's like talking to a blank wall. They'll be like, ooh, baby's gross, And I was once a 14-year-old girl. And so I know that would have been my reaction. Absolutely, for sure, that would have been my reaction. All the way to my mid-20s, in fact, that would have been my reaction. And then I hit 30. It was like somebody flipped a switch inside me. I needed to have a baby right away. I had 3 children. I was a stay-at-home mother. I was breastfeeding. I was co-sleeping. And so this part particularly really upsets me because they're taking away from these children that chance to grow and mature and go down a normal developmental path like most people arguably do. And they know that they're doing it, you see, but it doesn't stop them from doing it. They also know that there's regret. They know that there's fertility regret because the same doctor says he sees it in his own patients, that they come back to him in their 20s and they've met someone and they want to settle down. And he callously says to them, oh, the dog's not doing it for you anymore, is it? Meaning they thought they would be happy, always happy with a dog when they were 14 and this doctor was sterilizing them. And now in their 20s, they want to have a baby and they can't because of what these doctors have done. So to me, what is crystal clear in my mind now is they know what they're doing. They know that there is significant regret. They know that these children don't understand. And yet still they do it. It doesn't stop them from doing it.
It's like talking with diabetic complications with a 14-year-old. They don't care. They're not going to die. They're going to live forever, right? So I think when we're doing informed consent, I know that that's still a big lacuna of that we do it. We try to talk about it, but most of the kids are nowhere in any kind of a brain space to really, really, really talk about it in a serious way. That's always bothered me, but we still want the kids to be happier in the moment, right?
The second point is, it's crystal clear in my mind that this is not healthcare, in that you think of healthcare as improving health. That's the point. So you go to a doctor because you have something wrong, an illness, and you expect the doctor to improve your health, alleviate your suffering, maybe heal you. That's not what this is. And that you can see in the conversations in the WPATH files about the harm of cross-sex hormones, the iatrogenic effects. So iatrogenic means the treatment causes the illness. And this is evident when there are conversations about the effect of testosterone on the female body. We are not supposed to have large doses of testosterone, and so they have young teenage patients showing up at the hospital with vaginal atrophy, uterine atrophy, bleeding, pain, and they don't know what to do about it because this is brand new territory. We've never done this to teenage girls before. They're making it up as they go along. They're layering other drugs on top of the testosterone to try to cope with the very side effects that the testosterone has caused, never at any point questioning, is it a good idea to give these girls testosterone? Nobody ever questions nobody asks the most crucial question. And so in my mind, healthcare doesn't destroy health. Healthcare is supposed to improve health, not destroy it. The third point is, again, like the fertility question, they can't face the harm. So they see the harm because they see detransitioners. And if you see how these people talk about detransitioners, it's so infuriating because they trivialize the experience, they downplay the trauma, they downplay the harm that they've done by calling it, another step on the gender journey or something like that. But then they also try to pass the blame to the victim. Marcy Bowers, the president of WPATH, says detransitioners have to own and take active responsibility for the decisions that they make, particularly if they are permanent medical decisions. Completely oblivious to the fact that all of the blame lies on WPATH and the gender-affirming care providers, because WPATH is the group that removed all the guardrails. WPATH is the group that advocated for these young people to have unfettered access to an experimental treatment protocol with no safeguarding whatsoever. And then a whole bunch of innocent kids come along and they get harmed, and then WPATH blames the victims instead of looking at themselves and realizing that they are the ones who did all the harm. And the last one is, there is no sign of the Hippocratic Oath. The Hippocratic Oath to first do no harm has left the building. It's not present in WPATH at all. And you can mostly see that in the conversations about non-binary surgeries. So most people think non-binary is blue hair and they them pronouns, but there's a much more sinister side to it, and that's the surgical side. So they are creating bodies, smooth, sexless bodies in nullification, or they're creating second sets of genitals, or customized mastectomy scars without any concern for the impact on the person's health. It's not even an experiment. It's not even an experiment because nobody is tracking these outcomes or monitoring technique or patient health, nothing. There's no sign of the Hippocratic Oath.
We're going to take a quick break right now, and we'll be right back. And we're back with Mia Hughes, author of the WPATH Files. You know, the obvious example, I mean, this is heart-wrenching to hear, obviously. And I can see you've done a lot of thinking about this. The obvious question is, how is this possible? How is this possible that we are here today? And in this country, we still have this approach that's quite different from, say, what's happening in the UK, especially since the shutting of the Tavistock Clinic and the CASA report coming out and people going, oh my God, what have we done? Right? And a moratorium on these types of procedures. We're not there yet here. In some states, there's some action in that direction. So again, how is this possible?
It remains a constant source of amazement to me that the medical world could have been so duped by WPATH. And I think because the medical world exists within the wider culture, it is definitely a cultural issue in that the modern trans rights movement, it's a civil rights movement like no other, in that it has infiltrated all layers of society and with a very aggressive approach to activism, in that all disagreement is considered bigotry and transphobia that must be viciously punished swiftly to send a message to everyone else. So nobody has ever been allowed to disagree with anything the modern trans rights movement has said. So that's part of why society let this happen. But WPATH, as much as I dislike the group, they have done a brilliant job at presenting themselves to the world as being a real scientific and medical group. It's actually the stunt that they pulled is incredibly impressive. So they had a few decades to build up to it where not much was going on and they were very obscure. But then when they rebranded in 2007 as the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, they self-identified as a global leading healthcare group.
So, Mia, let me jump in, okay? So let's stop at this moment for a sec. And why don't you trace for me that origin to that point in 2007 where WPATH rebrands and then you'll tell me what happened next. But where do we come from to get to that point? What were they before that?
Right, so they started in 1978. And they were the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association, HBIGDA. It's not an easy acronym to remember. And back then, it was a very obscure field of medicine. But I would like to think that they really actually were pursuing science, at least attempting to find the best scientific way to help the people who were suffering from what we now call gender dysphoria. Trans activists started to join HBIGDA. The group's goals became predominantly political and less scientific. So throughout the first decade of this century, more and more activists joined HBIGDA. And in 2007, they changed their name, they rebrand, and they self-identify as a world-leading transgender healthcare group. From that point on, politics rules the day. The science has always been weak. The evidence has always been weak. But from 2007 onwards, it's all about political goals, in that they call it de-psychopathologization, which is they decided to reframe gender. At the time, it was called gender identity disorder. They decided to reframe it as a perfectly natural, healthy state of being to be transgender. It's natural, it's healthy, it's to be celebrated. It's definitely not a psychiatric disorder. They made that decision. In 2010, they make this announcement. Being transgender, it's not a mental disorder, it's not a psychiatric disorder. And so when they made that decision, from that point on, you could only affirm the gender identity. If somebody says they are trans, that's great. Celebrate it. Affirm it. It's wonderful. It's brilliant. The disorder then becomes the distress that you feel because you are transgender and because your mind and body don't match. You can't. They think you can't do anything about the mind because that's innate and it's to be celebrated. So the only thing you can now do is alter the body with hormones and surgeries. And from that point on, we have affirmation. The affirmation model, gatekeeping is transphobic, safeguarding is transphobic, access to drugs and surgeries on demand for anyone who says they are transgender. But the problem is this is 2010. This is a different landscape. It's still a rare disorder. We still don't have the teenage cohort that later came. So it may not have been that devastating if the social contagion had not exploded in the 2010s. But because at the same time that this was happening, the modern trans rights movement was getting ready to unleash upon us the relentless messaging, the relentless propaganda that, some people can be born in the wrong body. Everybody possesses a gender identity. Boys, you can be a boy with a girl brain, a girl with a boy brain. That, when the modern trans rights movement, that was in 2014, that they unleashed that messaging upon children and adolescents. When they did that, nobody stopped to question what would happen if we untether a whole generation of children and adolescents from reality at a crucial stage in their identity development. Nobody asked that question. We now know the answer to the question that was never asked, and that is you get a social contagion, you get an epidemic of young people mistaking the normal pubertal woes, the distress of being a teenager, maybe, discovering a homosexual identity, maybe they're autistic, whatever discomfort and distress they have, many of them are interpreting it as a sign that they are transgender precisely because of the messaging that the modern trans rights movement is bombarding them with. And when that met WPATH's no safeguarding, unfettered access to hormones and surgeries, when the two things collided, we ended up with a catastrophe.
It's hard to imagine, and I've looked a bit through the WPATH files. I haven't gone through them all, but it's obviously highly ideological, unquestionably. So the question is, how is this made it into being the approach of many of the most important medical associations in the world?
You see, that is the remarkable thing, because I can understand why we were duped. We, as non-medical people, I can understand why we fell for it. It's because we don't know anything about science or studies or whatever. But the fact that the entire medical world fell for it completely will never cease to amaze me. It astonishes me because basically it all stems from WPATH. So in 2001, they produced Standards of Care 6. That was the first ideological standards of care, their guidelines. You could see the shift with removing the mental health referral letters and such things. And then Standards of Care 6 influenced the Endocrine Society's 2009 guidelines. The Endocrine Society, those guidelines were drawn up largely by WPATH members who were also members of the Endocrine Society. So you've got overlap, you've got crossover already. Endocrine Society Guidelines 2009, also not based on any science whatsoever, based on ideology. And then the 2012 WPATH guidelines then cited the endocrine guidelines, which cite WPATH Standards of Care 6. So you've already got circular citations. They're citing each other, giving each other legitimacy, when in the center there's an empty shell devoid of anything that looks like science. But then from that point on, because you have those three and they look like legitimate guidelines, incredibly, the rest, all of the other major medical associations looked to those guidelines and just regurgitated them. They didn't investigate, is what they are saying true? And what they were saying was really remarkable. They were saying that, an experimental treatment pathway that can leave adolescents infertile, that can leave them missing body parts. This should be the first line of treatment. And so I think it can only be described by we're in something like a period of mass psychosis where large portions of society have lost sight of reality. In the report, I talk about the chain of trust. So in medicine, I got this idea from Dr. Stephen Levine. So when you are in med school or you're a resident or you're a doctor practicing, you simply do not have time to make sure that every treatment protocol, every drug, every set of guidelines is legitimate. You don't have time to research all of the studies, all of the drug interactions, the FDA approval. You don't have time for that. So you have to trust that someone above you has done all of the science, rigorously researched, and that the information you are being given is the best available science. And WPATH has broken the chain of trust in medicine because they present themselves as being a scientific organization. They have standards of care that have hundreds of citations. It all looks legitimate, and to the busy doctor or the busy med student, they accept it because this professional body that looks legitimate says that this is the best way to treat children and adolescents and vulnerable adults. They accept it. And so they broke the chain of trust, and now Europe has figured that out. They've looked at the evidence. They realize, goodness me, there's no evidence at all to support this. But North America, Canada, the US, I think it's going to be very difficult for these organizations to admit that they have been duped, that they got this wrong. On an institutional level, it's going to be very difficult.
Well, Mia Hughes, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
Thank you so much. The pleasure's all mine.
Thank you all for joining Mia Hughes and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Jan Jekielek.